first one, and I tell it to everybody, especially Black women that ask me about career, is do not let your job get in the way of your career.
Welcome to Her Agency, the podcast. I'm your host, Brandi Rand. This is a space curated for Black women in advertising who are bold enough to pick up the pen, write the brief, take up space, and own their agency. Welcome to Her Agency. I'm your host, Brandi Rand, and today we have MacKenzie Green. She's a powerhouse in digital and social media, and today our conversation really leans into building your personal brand, popping your shit, and telling the world about why you're brilliant and you should be in the room. And lastly, but not least, storytelling and why it's so powerful for brands. Thanks for tuning in. So I love to ask all of my guests one question as we intro. What is the one time you used your agency in your career?
Ooh, in my career, this is a hard one for sure. I would say the time I used my agency in my career was when I left a job that was not serving me. And that was very scary because I think I had always seen it as I can just push through. And that was the one time I truly listened to my gut. I listened to myself. I knew it wasn't serving me. And so rather than trying to force myself to stay at this place, I looked for other opportunities. And then I took my talents elsewhere.
Yeah, you took your ball to Miami.
Exactly.
Absolutely. It's really important to understand to be in spaces where we're celebrated, right?
Yes.
And not tolerated.
And that was the problem with this place. It was very clear that I was being tolerated. And I had recently learned about people like Bozeman St. John.
Right.
And so I became really fascinated and fell in love with this idea of I wanted to show up someplace fully and authentically as myself.
Absolutely.
And I realized this was not going to serve that mission. And so, I left.
I'm interested. Let's build on that just a little bit. How long did it take for you to get to that point? And really, because, there's this thing called quiet quitting that's happening and people are just kind of staying and floating around and not really taking that initiative, owning the agency and making the decision to up and leave. So how long did it take for you to get there?
It took me about 6 months.
Okay.
In reality, and this is going to sound like the craziest story ever, I should have known within a month. And the person that told me was actually Barbara Corcoran.
Oh, wow.
So she came to visit and do a podcast interview at this place that I worked for. And I was very new, very green, had only been there for almost a month, not even a full month.
Okay.
And I remember I was so excited to meet her because I love Shark Tank.
Yeah, she's a big deal.
A huge deal.
Yeah.
And so I was so excited and she came. And so she was like, I'm willing to take pictures with anybody here.
Okay.
And I said, okay, great. And so I ran up to her and I had my phone and I handed it to one of my coworkers and they took a couple pictures and Barbara went, how did the photos look? The person that took them. And they were like, they're fine. And handed me my phone. And as I was walking away, Barbara grabbed my arm.
Okay.
And she said, you need to leave this place.
What did she sense?
She said, this is clearly an important moment to you. And if they won't even take the time to make sure that this is the picture you want to commemorate this important moment, I don't think they're ever going to fully respect you.
Facts.
And what's crazy is because I was so new, I was like, okay, lady,
right,
weirdo. I went from this is one of my virtual mentors to kind of like, this lady is crazy.
No.
And now looking back, I'm like, oh yeah,
absolutely.
A month in, I should have just immediately been like, oh, this isn't the right fit. And
It's not.
Nothing wrong with saying I'm in the wrong place. Let me cut.
There's two things there. Let's dive in. The first was the red flag.
Yes.
That it took for someone else to see on your behalf.
Yes.
So, in relationships, we always talk about where's the red flag? I should have seen that red flag. So that was the first one.
Yes.
The second one that I really love about that quick story is the advocacy.
Yeah.
She leaned in for you.
Yes.
Noticed something that you were at a very, maybe minor level being oppressed by, right? Someone not taking your feelings and how important a moment was into consideration. And you just, being new and green. And, when we get into new jobs, we often have that. It usually takes about 6 months to let that ether wear off of oh, this is my dream job, or I'm so glad I got this opportunity that we don't see where the red flags are very early on.
Yeah. And I think we also, especially as women, especially as Black women, we have the tendency to go into things very hat in hand sometimes where it's like, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes,
when in reality, the gift is the place that got this exceptional talent.
My presence is a present.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so
be glad that I'm
that
here.
is truly something I've learned. We were kind of talking before this and I was saying one of my favorite leadership books in the world is not a nonfiction book, but rather
Right.
a fiction book. And my absolute favorite quote, and I think about it constantly now at this stage of my career, is Toni Morrison's Sula. And I'm going to butcher the kind of summation of the quote, but it was, when they realized they could be neither white nor male, they decided to be something else altogether.
Hold on. Run that back.
Yes.
Run that back. Say it again for the people.
When they realized they could be neither white nor male, they decided to be something else altogether.
Wow.
And I think about that quote now, which that's a book that I came across after this experience. And it really is, when we talk about this idea of owning your agency, is that I stopped going into things hat in hand or trying to make myself fit into places or just leading with the sense of like, thank you so much for this opportunity. But instead saying like, what do I own? What is my superpower? And it is those things that Toni Morrison said. Like, I realized I can be something else, and that something else is so powerful to bring with me everywhere I go.
I love that you pointed out the fact that you potentially could have left in a month.
Yeah.
Often it's seen as a bad thing, jumping around from role to role.
Absolutely.
And in this industry, you kind of have to do that. There's no more the days of being at a company for 20 and 30 years and getting the golden watch. I mean, we're in marketing and advertising, and you got to go first where you're loved and appreciated. We talk so much about bringing your most authentic self and full self to work. Well, if I can't do that here, I gotta move around. So when we talk about this industry that we're in and opportunities that present themselves, there's always the fork in the road, or the question that we come across: agency side or brand side?
It is so funny you have that question. So I have an incredible mentor that I was talking to recently, and he has launched his own agency.
Nice.
And we were talking, and I was kind of like, what attracted you? You know, you've worked in house at all these places. And it's what you just said, is being nimble, being agile. And he was like, well, agency provides you this opportunity to be this Swiss Army knife.
Right.
Where now all of a sudden you've worked with Netflix and Paramount and Ford and Toyota and this CPG brand and whomever else.
Right.
And he said, and now you become indispensable because you speak all these languages. Also, for your career advancement, you have met someone at every major player.
Yes.
You are no longer at the cocktail party trying to make the connect as a peer from another. Yes, you have worked with them. They have seen your product, your work, how you lead in person. And so as somebody who's only ever been brand side, I do have to say I have so much admiration and respect for people that are agency side, because I do think that's the future of where we're going.
What I love about what you said there is just being on the side and in the room and making the connection. So 2 points I want to double click on there is just, as we talk to people who are new in the industry or, junior level, there's something important that we often don't do, and that's collect a Rolodex, right? Take down all the names and all the experiences that you have in that moment at that opportunity, because you never know when you're going to need to rely on it to go to the next one. Yes. So when we talk about the work that you've done, you won a lot of awards, but you and I both share the lane of social and digital media. Yeah. Which is, you've built a career helping brands tell their stories. What originally drew you to digital and social?
Yeah, I think for social, it was, a bit of a circuitous route where I, came out of school in 2010 to not the greatest job market in the world. Yes. And so I was working at a small boutique financial advisory firm, was kind of building up that analytics side of myself. I had a father who was a Wall Street banker. I was like, I can do this. I've done this kind of stuff before. And we had a client who that day, he was a municipal's client, and he said, he's looked into my office and I was on my phone. And the guy said, my kid's always on her phone like that all the time. Wish I could figure out how to make money off of Facebook. And I was like, well, what do you mean you wish you could make money off of Facebook? And he was like, connect with people and talk about my brand. And I was like, I could totally do that
right now.
And basically raised my hand. And at that moment kind of started my own boutique marketing and social media consultancy.
Nice.
And so worked with a local area charter school in DC. I worked with a food startup that now when I go home to DC, it's so heartwarming because they sell their items in Whole Foods. And I remember when I was like literally standing outside of the metro with like, janky QR codes being like, please go to our website.
Yeah, back in the day.
Yeah. And so as I continued to progress kind of post undergrad, I had also been a sports reporter in my undergrad and really loved that world, but realized that media was changing so rapidly that it was like, well, how do I how do I get back in and learn what's changing? Because integrated marketing was starting to become more of a thing and all of this. So that's what led me to Columbia for my MBA. And while I was there, that's when I kind of went, okay, how do I mix storytelling and statistics? And so social just continued to kind of come to the forefront. And simultaneously, as a big film and TV nerd, I was fascinated what was happening in the world of like augmented reality and what I was hearing about VR glasses. And so then that's when the digital innovation side also kind of came into the mix and still shows up now. You know, at my current work, we just launched an AI chatbot to help people shop. And so, you know, but it really is this world that melds storytelling and statistics, you know, gut instinct and statistical insight in a way that I didn't see in what any of my other peers were pursuing at Columbia. And so that's how I have found myself into this crazy world. But, you know, when people ask me and they thinks Facebook is stupid or Instagram's a waste of time, I'm like, I just put silly stuff on the internet. Yeah. And I leave it at that.
That's what we do. I love your story. Your background and ours is so similar. And I think we need to chat more offline because I too started as, you know, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. And back home, I was eating what I kill as an entrepreneur and doing social media for small businesses, real estate professionals. But then when I moved to Dallas, the number one question when I went to knock doors was, what agency are you with?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, back home in Kansas City at the time, agencies, social media agencies in particular, wasn't a big deal.
Yes, which was crazy for me being in DC. I remember one of the women I worked with was a mayoral candidate in DC. And I remember thinking stuff, and I'm sure you had the same feeling, things that were so obviously intuitive to me were mind-blowing. Yes. Because I remember one of the big issues is she was getting her quotes and kind of thought starters stolen from her competition at these debates. And so I would just sit in the back on my laptop and just live tweet
it out. Absolutely.
On Hootsuite, you know, what she was saying.
I love Hootsuite.
I know, right? And it was blowing people's minds. And then I would go to New York to do interviews with major media brands, and they would ask that question of like, okay, but what larger brands have you done this for? And I'm like, well, I can't do it for larger brands if you won't let me do it for you.
But look, I'm doing it.
Exactly. And I was like, I have, this woman was not in the polling at all. And look where I got her.
I love that. Talk about creating a lane for yourself. And then here you are.
Yeah.
So with your journey, how would you measure success up till now?
I think prior to a couple years ago, I would have measured success strictly by the title and by the brand equity of the company I worked for. I would say the pandemic did a number for all of us. And I think now I measure success by leading other people, being the kind of manager and boss that I always wanted.
Ooh, beautiful.
And I think the other one is autonomy.
Yes.
That's been a huge part of how I have started really measuring my success. And that has also come from the point we were saying at the top of this is I have learned to finally start wearing the t-shirt with my face on it.
Yes.
Respectively, in terms of, you know, talking about what I have done and what I've accomplished in terms of that idea of success. I think I was always very wedded to this idea of like, people will see the hard work.
Yes.
And they will come find me.
And
that tied into my idea of success being the title. I thought, oh, the reason people aren't approaching me for my thought leadership is because I'm not a senior manager yet. I'm not a director yet. But when that title comes, they're going to beat down my door and they're going to come.
No, ma'am.
And so now I measure success by those entirely different metrics.
I love that. I love that. Speaking of metrics.
Yes.
And we know social media is all about storytelling. Yeah. You're a master storyteller.
Oh, boy.
You know, you do it in your 9 to 5 and your 5 to 9. I love that. Why do you think storytelling is so powerful, especially in this, like, everyone's an entertainer. Anybody can put out content. Brands are trying to, you know, tell funny stories via commercials. Why do you think storytelling is so important, especially in this day and age?
I've been currently reading Marcus Collins' book, For the Culture. And he talks about this a lot in terms of marketing is about how we find our tribe and see our identity in it. And I think what makes storytelling really powerful and why it matters to me is it allows people to make that connection of if your identity matches their identity. You know, if what you're talking about is aspirational, that they want to strive for, whether it's in my personal brand or my professional one. So yeah, in my personal brand, I am very committed to being a loud and proud blurred, being an active reader. Yes, being an active reader.
Your blur flag is
exactly. It fly very high when people are like, "Have you seen?" I'm like, "Say less." I've already seen all of Agatha. I've watched it 3 times. Like, don't even worry about me. And I think I realized there's so much power in telling that story of like, how did you fall in love with comics? Why did you get into memory competitions? Why do you care so deeply about Beyonce remaking Blackbird? Like just I find story is the way we reach one another.
That's beautiful. And I love that you tapped into the personal brand side of storytelling. Let's shift over to the company side,
Absolutely.
right? What should brands do to be better storytellers? Or on the flip side, what brands are really doing a good job of telling stories through their work?
To your first question, to be better storytellers,
Right.
I think you have to get real about who you're speaking to. I think I'll use Duolingo as a perfect example.
Okay.
Duolingo could have absolutely pretended that they were Babbel or Rosetta Stone. Of like, we're talking to the very serious language learner who wants to learn Japanese to expand themselves as a professional. And they're like, no, we're talking to the millennial and the Gen Z who took Spanish their entire academic career, retained nothing. Want to somehow be able to say something on their vacation, but they also don't want to like sit down for a classroom activity. And that's
we don't
why
have time.
That's why then it's so funny to us when we're watching people like making videos of themselves in a hurricane shelter, being like, gotta get my Duolingo streak. You know, we're like, yeah, that's Duolingo.
life.
They're
Right.
that person. They're
Right.
not here, sit down. It's a 7-hour course. And at the end of it, we expect fluency. Another brand I think tells their story well because they know themselves is Liquid Death.
Okay.
You know, even when they make a decision that everybody's like, why are they doing an Elf Cosmetics collab? It is so thought through. Like, I think they recently did one with, I think it was Yeti, and they created a Yeti cooler that looked like a coffin.
Okay.
And I was like, that's their person.
Yes.
Like, I think they were even at Stagecoach recently being like, sell your soul to join Club.
Oh, wow.
Liquid. And exactly. Now, Fiji Water could never.
Ever.
And would never.
Yes.
And I don't expect them to. And so it's, you know, there's so many brands that's so smart. Like, same thing with My Topicals. The way I see them manifest themselves.
It's so good.
Yes. And they're both their story and how the brand shows up, whether it's through their influencers.
Yes.
I just think the way brands get better at storytelling is be realistic about who you are and who you're talking to.
Absolutely.
I think when stuff feels silly and forced, it's because that's not actually your brand, but you want to aspire to move your brand in that direction.
Absolutely. Realistic.
Yeah.
I think we should use that word more.
Yeah.
I think we have drug authentic through the mud. Like, I think that we should pivot to realistic. That's a really good paradigm shift. I think a lot of people could take away from this conversation. So we've named a couple of brands that are doing it well. Do you have anyone that you've worked on in particular that you are really proud about the storytelling in your career?
I will say this is like me patting myself on the back, but I loved what we did and launched BET Plus with when I was there.
Right.
Because it was the first of its kind Black streaming network. And my proudest moment is, you know, we were all sitting together. It was 2019 and we were like, well, we're launching another streaming network and it's all Black. And we were like, I guess people will watch it. And then came March 2020, we were like, okay, well, people have watched everything on everything else. I guess they're coming here. And then came May and we were like, oh, and everybody's looking for Black content.
Yes.
Oh boy, we got both of those things. And I will say my proudest brand moment we did was a little bit of a troll at other brands that maybe weren't being realistic or authentic because, you know, every streaming platform magically had a Black stories.
Yes, the Black
bar
section.
Yes. And so we had, for Juneteenth in 2020, we had our top bar said, Black content. The second line said, more Black content. The third line said, yep, you guessed it, still Black.
Still Black.
And it was we just kept going with this joke because we were like, you don't have to search.
Yes.
For us, within our platform to try to find Black stories. Like,
this is what we do.
It has always been the center of what we do.
So
I will say that is a moment that I am eternally proud of.
I love that. That was very revolutionary.
Yeah.
It was. BT Plus. Social media is often underestimated and mistaken as like the add-on instead of something that is critical, like you and I know, to a brand campaign. What are some key ways that social media actually supports revenue growth and drives business for maybe the brand or the small business owner that doesn't see it as something that they should have? Yeah,
I think the first part is building that authentic audience, you know, going back to the word authenticity. But I think it's those brand evangelists that you build within this digital clubhouse that you're creating. Particularly when it comes to Instagram, I think that's more of your digital clubhouse.
For sure.
I always say that TikTok is the land that ruined the top of the funnel. So that's where you go, where you're like, I just want to reach anybody who randomly on this day hits the cross section of what I talk about. So if you are a brand that, I don't know, makes like a very specific comb from a very specific product.
Yes.
it is okay to repeat yourself and repeat your brand story
Right.
every single time you make a video on TikTok. I think in terms of this idea that social is all about click-through rate to your main site, Mark Zuckerberg and Adam Mosseri are not in the business of getting you to go to a third location. So I think the better thing we all need to be thinking about is actual social commerce. Like we're in the land of brands starting to tap into Shop My and using Amazon storefronts and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think that's where we're going to start seeing the actual measurable impact is through engagement, you know, entertainment score, because I'm a Dash Hudson girly, and then that actual social commerce revenue.
Okay, that's nice. So being a pioneer, launching BET Plus, you've got a lot of accolades. You've done a lot of big things. What would your reputation say as a strategist in this space? And what does recognition look like for you now?
Oh man, as a strategist, I would say it's that I have a data background that I don't think many of my peers do. And I think that has continued to serve me well, whether it is going to our audience development team and being like, surprise, I made a compound growth rate model to give you the next 5 years of potential social growth if all of these factors stay in place. And people are like, whoa,
right?
How'd you come up? What? How'd you think that?
And yes, and more please.
Exactly. And so I think those things, having that data insight informs my strategy. But because I'm at the core, someone who loves stories and silly things and silly stuff, then I'm able to back out like my silly, crazy ideas with an actual data piece to it. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, both my legacy and how I approach what I think I bring and think about social in a unique fashion.
Not what you think, what you know you bring.
Yes, what I know.
Okay, because we are all about the flowers and the accolades.
Exactly.
And so what advice could you give to women in advertising and marketing about, you know, tooting their own horn?
Yeah.
You know, saying it with their chest about what they've done and just really being more vocal about the work that they've put in. Are you a Black girl in advertising? If so, we've created the most amazing space just for you. If you are ready to thrive and not just survive in this male-dominated space, if you want to lock arms, build community and culture with others that look like you, join her agency, The Collective, a place where we're having real conversations, doing the work, building our brands, taking up space, and owning our agency. See you there.
Absolutely. I think the first one, and I tell it to everybody, especially Black women that ask me about career, is do not let your job get in the way of your career.
Okay.
I think it is so easy, and I'm incredibly guilty of this. I think I told you this story when we first talked, is I was working at BET as an intern. I would get in early, I would stay late.
Right.
And I went in this one day, and this will also show people my age. It was a day where we were having R. Kelly on.
Okay.
That should show people I'm that old. But we were having him come on the show, and somebody was like, hey, can someone raise their hand to pull all the clips from his videos, or kind of go through all his videos and tell us what they are, the timestamps, everything, so that we know what clips. And I was like, I'm about to be the hardest worker here.
Yes.
I get in 2 hours early. I was in that edit bay for maybe 12 hours, no breaks, going through every single video, every interview we had with him. Finally come out, the sun's down. This was like middle of summer. So
you put in some work.
I put in work, and I came downstairs and everyone was gone except for the head of the department. And I said, where is everyone? And she was like, oh my God, I didn't know you were still here. And I was like, what do you mean? I've been upstairs working.
Yes.
I came in super early to put this perfect project together for you. And she was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I just sent like one intern off to this executive dinner because I would have loved to have sent you, but I didn't know you were here.
What?
And she was like, and I sent this other person off to the Transformers premiere to cover it.
Yeah.
I know you're going to college for broadcast journalism. I would have sent you, but I didn't know. And that was really a moment that reminded me, like, I was so busy focusing on the job that I forgot to zoom out and think of my career.
Wow.
To, in a moment, say, I've done the job well. I've pulled the clips they want. Now I'm going to go downstairs. I'm going to eat lunch with these people. I'm going to make conversation.
Wow.
I'm going to reintroduce myself, schedule informationals. You know, I think even at the stage I am, being a VP, like I tell people all the time, I still schedule informationals with people. I still go with questions. You know, I'm curious. I'm a voracious reader. So my go-to question in every single interview is like, what's a book that changed your life?
Oh, okay.
Or that you recommend. And it always gives me an excuse to follow up with that person at a later date. Because, you know, sometimes it's hard to find those authentic follow-ups. But when you finish that book they love and you're like, hey, did this passage ever jump out to you when you were at this stage?
That is the major key.
Yes, it really is.
Yes.
I believe in that Truman quote that all leaders are readers, but not all readers, or all readers are leaders, but not all leaders are readers.
Are readers, right. Yeah. That's so good.
And I think now more than ever at this space and time, we get to see that reading and engaging with content is very important. But
it's very necessary.
Yes. And I think the other one I would tell, you know, within that building of your brand, it's like, don't be afraid to share your expertise. Be loud about it.
Absolutely.
You know, I worked with this incredible woman who once told me, she was like, go on LinkedIn and write, share what's going on, share what you did, share the project.
Let the people know.
Because again, to that point of like my job getting in the way of my career, I really always thought the title, the company, my work will somehow permeate through the ether and reach the right person. When in reality, it took me going on my own LinkedIn and being like, here's a really cool thing I did. Yes. I'm super proud of myself.
And you should know.
And you all should know this. And by the way, here's 6 coming posts about how I did it, because I think a lot of our counterparts do not have any shame in being like, I'm an intern at, you know, XY at Goldman Sachs. Here's everything I know. I mean, the internet, social media is filled with people who are not nearly as qualified, nearly as hardworking, nearly as educated, but leading their expertise. I mean, think of how many people we see who are like, I'm a financial guru.
Yes.
I got myself out of debt. And you're like,
no.
Okay, Catherine, you had $2,000 of credit card debt.
A hot streak.
Like, what are we talking about?
You had a hot streak maybe with crypto. Like, it's no,
truly. Or they're like, master. Get my reading guide. And you're like, you read Court of Thorns and Roses.
No,
like, now
or the reading guide is the one that you downloaded and that you're doing a master resale for. So let's
so it's like, I think that's a piece of advice I'm constantly giving when folks are like, what should I know? And then truly don't be afraid to take crazy leaps and crazy chances.
I love it.
You know, like I said, when I started at a streaming network in 2019 that was focused on Black content, I was like, we've all lost our minds.
Yes.
We've truly lost the plot. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And the same with the role I'm in now. It's like working in fashion. I'm like, everything that needs to be said has been said. What are you doing?
What are we doing different?
But realizing, okay, there is something new and fresh, and I have expertise that has never been seen here.
Absolutely.
So yeah, those are my pieces.
Those are beautiful stories.
Thank you.
But when we also spoke, we talked about, there was an underlying theme there to that story, and it was leaning into doing the most to get the least.
Oh yeah.
And as Black women,
we're so
and not just in our industry, right?
Yes,
it's across the board, right? What are we told? To work harder,
twice as hard to get half as far.
Facts.
Yeah.
So when we go down that line, and for anyone who might be tuning in today, what do you say to people who have that mindset of doing the most to get the least, or experiencing that?
Yeah.
How should they pivot? What's the solution?
Because it is real. It's not, I mean, I think that's the interesting thing that Black women experience is a lot of our peers talk about like perceived slights. And it's like, and when you zoom out, they're like, well, maybe it was in my head. Yeah. But for us, you really are like, oh no, I have shown up to client meetings with my hair braided and been told like, why don't you just wait right here real quick?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, so I didn't make that up.
Right.
Okay.
Or your hair looks different today.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you sure you want to go meet with Macy's?
Right.
And you're like,
yeah.
Okay. But I think that's where I take it back to that Sula quote. You know, I think there's so much power in realizing I will never be white nor male. So I might as well be something else. And I think, again, it's that being unapologetically showing up as yourself. Because the crazy part is, and this is the scariest part, people either love it or they'll hate it.
Right.
They'll either celebrate it or they'll want to get rid of it. And to be quite honest, I have now reached a point in my professional journey, I would much rather know this is not something you want than to waste 9 months of my life trying to get you to like me when Barbara Corcoran has just told me run for the hills.
Right.
You know, it's that
this is not the place for me.
Yeah. And I think that is, again, and you know, again, I'm a big old dorky reader. Like that's where I fall into finding stories that refute my own negative self-talk. I'm a huge believer in this idea, because I am very guilty of it. I'm like, well, you know, if it's one bad day at work, I'm like, I've never come up with a good idea in my life.
All right.
And having that proof, like disproving myself. And if I can't find my own personal proof, I'll go look other places. I'll go look for those vision expanders. I'll look for somebody else. You know, I had, you know, I'll say my own embarrassing thing out loud, but like I had a company that I was super passionate about, and I like chased this recruiter down to the point that they were like, please stop emailing me.
Right.
You are far too pushy. And I called my mom at my big age and I was like crying in the phone. I was like, I've embarrassed myself and these people are going to hate me. And taking it back to Bozeman, my mom goes, when Bozeman was a temp, she wrote on Spike Lee's script and he found it charming.
That's exactly what she did.
And I was kind of like, what does that have to do with me? And she goes, well, if that had been the right place for you, that person would have found your persistence to actually be exactly what they want on their team.
That's so good.
And she was like, so if they don't actually like you authentically, wanting answers, wanting to engage, wanting to share industry news that you're seeing that relates to their business, you don't want to be there.
You don't.
And I think that is the hardest part that we have as Black women is that we're like, I'm killing myself to get so little.
Right.
And it's like, but what if you just had the audacity to truly believe that you deserved everything and demanded that from the places until you got it?
And be like Viola Davis and grab your purse over your shoulder and get up and leave.
I mean, it's a joke, you know, I think one of the most, you know, not to be super political, but I think one of the most powerful things I've seen in the wake of this election is Black women being like, I resign.
Yes, we are done.
I resign from prioritizing everybody else over myself.
Because we see where it gets us.
And I think what's funny is to watch then that silence that kind of settled over the community of like, so if I'm not telling myself, if I realize that this is real, that no matter how I show up, if I'm perfect, there's still gonna be a problem. So what would I do? And I think we're the opposite of our counterparts where they're like, what could I do if I couldn't fail?
Yeah.
Instead, we're like, I'm gonna fail.
Yes.
So what do I want to do now?
What is the
backup
backup
plan? I know
plan?
we're running straight at the wall.
Absolutely.
And that silence that I felt from other Black women of like, oh my God, now that I can just go for it.
Yeah.
What do I actually want to do? And it's kind of like, and that's what I want to see.
It's so liberating.
It is an incredibly liberating feeling. And that's what I would tell people is like, move on past the whole, like, what could I do if I couldn't fail? No, failure's coming.
Yeah.
Now the beauty
it's inevitable.
The beauty is, how do we embrace it? How do we brace for impact?
So fail fast.
Yeah. Fail fast. Like there's a great line in Ed Catmull's book, Creativity Inc., where he talks about at Pixar, they will charge the wrong hill as quickly as possible.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
it's kind of like the thing about the buffalo.
Yeah.
Have you heard that? How they run toward the storm just to get through it quicker?
And so that's my thing. It's like fail as fast as humanly possible.
Right.
I would rather go for it and have everybody be like, well, that was a horrible idea than to have never done it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important. When we talk about how you've climbed your way to what some would seem to be the top, right? There's levels to everything, but we know that in our world, there's a lot of attrition. We are leaving the industry left and right. And really the whole point of my platform is to make sure we stay in the room, right? Because if we're not in the room to tell our stories and to advocate for ourselves, who's going to do it?
Exactly.
So when we look at your career and navigating early on, what's some advice you wish that you'd had at the beginning of your career about the moves that you make?
Yeah, that big one is don't let the job get in the way of your career. Like schedule those meetings. Also, those people at the top want to talk about themselves.
Ooh.
Schedule that informational with the SVP as an assistant. If you're a manager, I mean, I remember I had a lot of audacity when I was working at Paramount.
Nice.
And I remember scheduling a meeting with the then CMO.
All the way up.
Yeah. I just was like,
because why not?
Yeah. I was like, well, who cares?
Yeah, they're people.
What are they going to do?
Right.
He can either just ignore my message
or say yes.
Yeah. And he said yes. And in the course of it, had this incredible conversation, gained this incredible mentor. Same thing with the pandemic. I was like emailing people I had no business messaging. I was like, they're stuck at home.
Right.
I don't have anything else to do.
all are.
I know for a fact they're not off on a business trip. Like, you can't avoid me now, Craig.
Right.
I know you're in your house.
I see your green light on LinkedIn. You're there.
And so I think that's something I would have told myself is like, don't be afraid to make those connections and just keeping in touch for no other reason than to just constantly share like where you are. I would say the other one is like, get that professional content out there.
Yes.
It sounds so annoying, but really it's like, right on LinkedIn, make the LinkedIn video. If you are a really cool corporate lawyer that loves your outfits, make those TikTok videos.
Yes.
If you are somebody who does great dinner parties for all of your girlfriends, who are also professionals, like make those into posts. I think that part of it, creating that digital footprint, I wish I had done a better job of that in my career, because again, I kept thinking like, oh, somebody will know I did this project. Somebody will keep up with that. It's like, no, keep every single link, share it, create that portfolio. And yeah, then I would say the other one is like have a discipline / self-care practice that serves you when you're away from the thing.
Okay.
I think it's very easy for us as Black women to put the armor on and leave it on,
suit up
all the time, and forget that like it's okay to schedule the spa day.
Yeah.
It's okay to have face mask Friday at the end of the week. It's okay to have a cozy habit.
And take the PTO.
Yeah, it's like, that's a big one.
Wow.
It's like, take the PTO, have a cozy hobby, whether it's like coloring in a coloring book.
Yes.
You know, and then I would say the other part of it is like, I'm a huge believer in this idea that the physical discipline helps to permeate through the way you are disciplined in other things. And so finding that physical discipline practice that
it's so critical,
you would sustain. So it's like,
that's a big piece that a lot of people miss. Yeah.
I think there's a bit of that like productivity bro thing where you're like, oh, okay, Bob Iger gets up at like
productivity bro.
Yeah, but it's like Bob Iger gets up at 4 a.m. and does his Versa climber. But like if you're a yoga girly, make that a consistent, whether it's showing up for 5 minutes every day, whether it's showing up for 50, like whatever it is that reminds you can do hard things. Like I love lifting.
And to move your body.
Yeah, I love lifting and running. And I will be so honest, this sounds insane to say, every time I have run a marathon or half marathon, I'm like, oh, I can do hard things.
Yes.
I've done worse.
But it's also about getting back into your body,
yes.
right? And getting out of the mental and back into your body. Because at the end of the day, our health is our wealth, right?
Yes.
And if we're not physically able to do the thing, we can't do the thing.
Well, I to this day, it's a thing that I think of constantly. So I was in Miss USA eons ago. And I remember my Miss Oregon, we were all at rehearsal. We were exhausted.
Okay.
And she said, oh, if we're tired now, imagine what it'll feel like when you win. And that sits with me all the time because we see the discourse online now about like that girl showing up as your highest self. And my ultimate goal is I want to be the CMO of a major media brand.
Yes, let's speak that out right
and
now.
So every day I think about what my Miss Oregon said. If I'm tired today as a VP, imagine how tired you'll be when you are a CMO. And so I try to cultivate those habits and pieces in place that will serve me down the road because I'm like, it's not going to get easier.
That's beautiful. That the physical part is key. I'm personally a weightlift and Pilates girly. Okay. So me and my knees, I can drop it low, but I can't run. So the marathon's not happening.
Well, the crazy part is I am a Pilates girl too and started it when I was a swimmer. So I have been a really decorated swimmer, junior Olympian, D1, all of this stuff. And came out of it very unexpectedly due to injury.
And how did you feel? Oh,
it was horrible. I was not ready. Still to this day, my family cannot get me in a pool to swim laps.
Wow.
Like it is when people talk about like the one that got away, for me, swimming is the one that got away. It is like the love that left me unexpectedly. And so weirdly, running gave me a level of mental discipline I had never had in swimming. Now, I was a sprinter in swimming. Okay. So when you watch like Sprint on Netflix, that was me. I talked so much crap. Okay. I was at practice for like a total of 30 minutes. I was like, say less. What do I have to do?
In and out.
Yeah. I was like, you call me when you need a race won.
Oh, okay.
Now what do you need?
Okay.
There was something about 26.2 miles when swimming had left my life. And I had a bit of a quarter of a life crisis, like on the eve of my 20th birthday. Yeah, I was like everything my whole life was planned around being an Olympian. Wow. Now that that's gone, what am I going to do with my life? Yes. And so truly, I was like the hardest thing I can imagine and the worst thing I could do as somebody who barely wanted to do dry land training was a marathon. Yes. And so 26
the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
And so 26.2 miles later, I was like, oh, I can do really hard things.
That's like, a good life lesson though, just in general, right? Yes. Whether we're talking about the physical space or just something that you want to take on, whether it's learning a new language or picking up and just moving across the world,
I
right?
joke with
doing
people
the
all
hard
the time.
thing.
It is the most mentally challenging thing I do, and it informs so much what I do going forward. I have never stood at the start line and not thought, I'm so excited. And then the minute I crossed the start line, thought, I got to get out of here. This is the worst idea I've ever had. And then I'm cruising till 20. I'm like, okay, it's not too bad. Not bad. You hit 20 and you're like, this is the stupidest idea.
Yeah, the roller coaster.
Yeah, somebody come get me. I hate it here. My last half marathon, I called my mom for, I think, every mile marker for the last 4 miles. And told her I was quitting. Oh, God. And every time she picked up the phone, she was like, you're not going to quit. I don't know why
you're not done yet. Just
and she goes,
girl.
Okay, I'll talk to you at the finish. And I was like, I don't know why you're saying the finish. I'm quitting. And she was like, you've never quit anything in your life. You're not going to start now. Yeah. I am.
But that speaks to having the person in your corner or in your ear that helps you push on.
And I think that fit. But I think truly, if I was talking to, and you know this, I'm talking to other Black women, like, have a physical discipline practice that will teach you to push through when your brain is telling you to stop.
Yeah, that lets you tap into your body. That's beautiful. So let's wrap up. What's next for you? What's coming down the pike? So we've already spoken into existence being a CMO. So that's done.
Yeah.
But what else?
Oh man, I mean, I spend so much time journaling to my future self and all the stuff that I think she's accomplished. So yeah, I would love, I will speak more into the things I want, but like I would love more opportunities to share and speak on panels and speak at events, because I do think it does something for other kind of Black women that want to step into these spaces to see people that look like them. I'm excited for covers we have upcoming for my work. You know, fashion may feel frivolous to people, but it has very large pop culture zeitgeist implications.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited for some of
and
the
as
talent.
Black women, fashion it's a cultural pillar.
And so I'm so excited for some of the talent we're going to have coming forward and continue to collaborate. But yeah, I'm hoping to continue to share my expertise and as the audience comes to keep serving them more.
Yeah. So we are going to book you on these panels.
Yeah.
And do all the things. So lastly, before we wrap up, 3 quick takeaways that you'd like our listeners to remember from this conversation.
Absolutely.
Top 3, go.
I would say develop your physical discipline practice and the habits that'll support you on the way to whatever the ultimate goal is. The other one is get a reading habit. You'd be amazed at how much your life expands when you start challenging yourself mentally in that way. And then the other one is, don't let your job get in the way of your career.
Beautiful.
Find somebody that you want to connect with today and shoot them a cold email.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.